All right, Patrik Schumacher, the granddaddy of parametricism. And we're all colleagues together in Vienna, so we have to think about something they haven't heard that we may already know. Okay, but so Wolfsburg, we could have had any number of projects, but Wolfsburg, for us, just checked off so many boxes in the show. I'm really curious to hear about how the digital rolled into that project. And for us, it seems like a mature digital project in your office. But what led up to it?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's not the first project which we fully 3D modeled.
Right.
So the whole sequence of projects, I think from the mid-90s on,
Yeah.
which were fully 3D modeled and all the drawings were done digitally. Prior to this, from, let's say, 1990, we just did a few 3D sketches to help with perspectival visualization and then still drew up everything. But from the 94, 95, all the projects were digitally developed, including Maxi, by the way. But Wolfsburg was more sophisticated in terms of the types of geometries, in terms of those, instead of compared to Maxi and Cincinnati, which were the two prior competition wins which were ready to build. But it was more restrained than a whole series of competitions we've done in the 95, 96, 97. By the way, Montreal National Library, Quebec National Library, by the way, was one of those projects, and the Graz Kunsthaus, where we were very, very fluid and continuous with NURB surfaces. Yep. And Wolfsburg represents aspects of this, but much more constrained. Yeah. But it has double curved surfaces and was fully developed in 3ds Max. And then was in 3D AutoCAD, all the elements were taken apart and modeled, and we also had 3D milled formwork components. Yeah. And we had a very sophisticated structure, and AKT fully worked along with us with this continuously differentiated space frame with a double fanning, and each element being uniquely dimensioned, so it was sophisticated on that level as well. But as I said, only later works, maybe much later works, were catching up with the ambitions of fluidity we had formulated earlier.
And just to talk for a minute about manufacture, control of construction, and some of the things that were used there, would you talk a little bit about how you took these topological surfaces and turned them into buildable elements, or even elements that could be drawn?
Well, this was a bit similar to what Alejandro was talking about in terms of the sectioning method. Yeah. But we everything was 3D modeled and then sliced in horizontally and vertically through sections, and we created separate models for each cone, each element, and then some of the elements, as I said, had to be milled off the files for the formwork. So this way we were involved. It was very, very intense and long elaboration of the construction documents, which we created together with Roland Meyer, who we had used already at Vitra, as somebody who's also a concrete specialist.
Interesting.
But it was certainly, compared to Maxi, geometrically more demanding and sophisticated. And we worked much more intensively, had to work much more intensively resolving all the details and corners.
Because the reason that I'm asking is you and Zaha were able to work, and Wolf as well, but you were able to work in places without a mature construction industry, like China, Azerbaijan. You were able to go to places that were not Germany and realize a level of complexity that a lot of other architects failed at. And would you say that's because of Fino in any way? Or was it Fino just a step in that direction? But
no, it was a step. I mean, in fact, the Azerbaijan project, for instance, the structure was developed and constructed by a German firm, by Mero.
Okay, so the Germans just built it.
And we've built up a series of suppliers, which we brought out to these territories. Actually, all the molding of all the panels was done in Sharjah, but there was a Danish engineer who set up a fiber concrete plant there with adjustable molds.
And they took those molds to Azerbaijan, or they built them
They
in
built them in
Denmark?
Sharjah.
Oh, okay. Huh.
I mean, Wolfsburg was interesting. I think it's a wonderful and seminal project for us in terms of the conception of a continuous topography and multiple continuous topographies with different tectonic logics, the undercroft, the interior space, as well as the space frame, and they kind of correlate and resonate with each other. And it's continuously multi-surface project, so it's very dear to us. At the same time, it remains has been rationalized to a certain extent, and which was very important for us at that period to show the buildability, because all the prior efforts were thrown out as unviable in a way in terms of competition, a whole series of competition losses. But I want to also say that the Yokohama project was on our mind as a true seminal key project of the decade, and in retrospect that remains true. And I find the 90s, and that's why I find this show so exciting, represents for me decades of absolute importance of establishing a new paradigm, which I think we'll still have decades to work through. So I would compare it to the 1920s. For me, the 1990s are very similar to the 1920s. And at the end of the decade, we had achievements which are also comparable to the achievements of the 20s. And I think there's so much yet to work through and deliver. But the 90s was it for me.
Yeah, okay. Well, that leads to maybe my next and last question, which is, so you're building now a lot of things, and you decide at precisely that moment that you also need to theorize things. Now, why are you training your competition in how to work? And what's the idea of pushing parametricism as a paradigm for work? I mean, in the sense that you're giving away the secret sauce.
Well, very happy to. For me, it's all open source, and it's not my creation, our creation. It's a collective creation, actually coming out of the 90s, and you've been absolutely seminal and critical. And I remember when I saw Jeff at the AA and what they were doing by hand, the kind of new sensibilities of field space, of continuously differentiated system, and totally new sensibility. And we've been working on this degree of fluidity and gradients at Zahadid Architects, but it was actually your writings and Jeff's writings which put a conceptual register onto this, gave us vocabulary to describe and home in on these. And it was always a collective movement. Of course, we've gone many stages through that, and in retrospective, I termed this whole movement, parametricism, also as an accelerator. It backfired to some extent. People don't like to be categorized, but for me it's an absolutely collective movement, and it's a shame that it lost some steam in the last few years due to the financial crisis, all the work which didn't happen in Europe and the Middle East and many places. So we have to pick that up, and I really compare it to modernism, the 1920s or the 1990s. This kind of stagnation of the last 8 years is a little bit like the interruption of the Second World War, and coming out of this, we should finally remake the physiognomy of this planet like modernism have made it. And that goes urbanism, architecture, interiors, products, furniture, everything, the total makeover which you see happened. It must be a wonderful experience for somebody like Mies and Gropius or Korb, which all met at Behren's office, and then in the early 20s established some manifestos. In 1960, the whole world was transformed in the image of they've been conceived. And that's what I'm into, and I need everybody to. And the whole generation who was converging towards this needs to be reignited as a project. That's what I feel. For me, the theorizing is also about that it's not just a new set of formal sensibilities. It's not art like Kibi is saying. It is a real impacting paradigm which makes a lot of sense with sociological depth, socioeconomic profundity.
We have to dive through the next 5 years, and the conservative backlash will be over. And then, so I think this exhibition gives me hope that when this is over, this conservative backlash, then we can start in a new direction.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think very much the pulling the pieces apart and then recomposing things to show the relationships and commonalities is very much in the spirit of exactly what you're talking about. And the show is a provocation. I mean, we didn't want to have like the Blob in the Box or whatever the shows were that have been mentioned that try to put a ribbon around things and be done. This is really more about opening things up. So, all right. Well, I'd like to thank all of our guests. I'd like to thank the audience. It was really great.
This is the Greg Lynn Show with Greg Lynn, produced by the CCA. I'm Patrik Schumacher. Thanks for watching.